In 1969, a brand new band walked into a recording studio with a total budget of under $5,000 and exactly 36 hours to record their debut album. That album went on to sell over 10 million copies worldwide and is still considered one of the greatest rock albums ever made. The band was Led Zeppelin, and the story of how 4 young men from England became the most influential rock band in history is far stranger, darker, and more extraordinary than anything you have ever read in a music textbook. Welcome to SoundLegends. Led Zeppelin existed for only 12 years. They released just 9 studio albums. They never released a single, refusing to follow the music industry's rules at every turn. And yet they sold over 300 million records worldwide, inspired virtually every rock band that came after them, and created music so powerful that it still sounds completely fresh more than 50 years later. But behind the iconic riffs and sold-out stadiums lies a story full of chaos, tragedy, mythology, and moments that almost destroyed everything. This is the real story of Led Zeppelin. In late 1968, guitarist Jimmy Page was rebuilding a band from the ashes of the Yardbirds, a group he had briefly played in before it collapsed. He had a vision for a new kind of music, heavier than anything that existed, built on blues roots but pushed into completely new territory. He needed the right people. He found Robert Plant through a recommendation from a friend. Plant was singing in a small, unknown band in the British Midlands and was so obscure that Page had to drive hours into the countryside just to watch him perform in a tiny venue. Page was stunned by what he heard. Plant was 19 years old. Page then asked Plant to recommend a drummer. Plant immediately suggested his childhood friend John Bonham, a powerhouse drummer who was already legendary in local music circles for hitting harder than anyone had ever seen. Bonham initially turned down the invitation to join the band. He received no fewer than 40 telegrams begging him to reconsider before he finally said yes. The 4 members, Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, John Paul Jones, and John Bonham, rehearsed together for the very first time in a small room in London in September 1968. Within the first hour of playing together, they all knew something extraordinary had just been born. Stairway to Heaven is arguably the most famous rock song ever written. It has been called the greatest guitar solo in history. It has been played on rock radio more than any other song in the format's history, and it was written in a single evening. Jimmy Page and Robert Plant were staying at a remote cottage in Wales called Bromley Awr in the spring of 1970. There was no electricity, no television, no distractions, just 2 musicians sitting by a fire with acoustic guitars and notebooks. In one sitting, Plant wrote almost the entire set of lyrics while Page developed the chord progression that would become instantly recognizable to every music fan on earth. The song was never released as a single. Led Zeppelin refused on principle. It was never promoted by the band. Radio stations simply started playing it because listeners demanded it. It runs for 8 minutes and 2 seconds. An eternity by commercial radio standards, and yet it became the most requested song in the history of FM radio in America. To this day, Stairway to Heaven earns an estimated $500,000 in royalties every single year. John Bonham is widely considered the greatest rock drummer who ever lived. His kick drum pattern on the song, When the Levee Breaks, is the most sampled drum beat in the history of recorded music, used by hundreds of artists across rock, hip-hop, and electronic music over 5 decades. But what made Bonham truly extraordinary was not just his power, it was his feel. He played with a sense of groove and timing that no drummer before or since has been able to fully replicate. He used larger drumsticks than almost any other professional drummer. Wooden handles originally designed for timpani mallets, which gave his playing a weight and depth that was physically impossible to ignore. He recorded the drum track for When the Levee Breaks in the Stairway at Headley Grange, a remote country house in Hampshire where Led Zeppelin often rehearsed and recorded. The microphones were placed at the top of the stairwell, 2 floors above Bonham's kit to capture the natural reverb of the building. The result was a drum sound so enormous and so unique that recording engineers have been trying to recreate it ever since. No one has ever fully succeeded. For a band that sold hundreds of millions of records and filled the largest stadiums on earth, Led Zeppelin lived almost entirely outside the rules of the music industry. They never released a single in the United Kingdom, ever. Their manager, Peter Grant, had an iron policy that the band would never compromise their albums by pulling individual tracks out for commercial release. They refused to appear on Top of the Pops, Britain's most popular music television show, because they felt it was beneath them. They turned down offers to perform at Woodstock in 1969, despite being one of the hottest new bands in the world at the time. Page felt the festival format would not do justice to their live show. They negotiated an unprecedented deal with Atlantic Records that gave them almost complete artistic control over their music, something virtually unheard of for a new band in 1968. Their contract guaranteed they could not be pressured to release singles, change their sound, or alter their album artwork. In an era when record labels controlled everything, Led Zeppelin operated entirely on their own terms from the very first day. On September 25, 1980, John Bonham was found dead at Jimmy Page's home in Windsor. He was 32 years old. The cause of death was asphyxiation after consuming an extraordinary amount of alcohol. He had drunk approximately 40 measures of vodka in the hour before his death. The remaining 3 members of Led Zeppelin made the decision swiftly and unanimously. On December 4th, 1980, they issued a statement that read, "We wish it to be known that the loss of our dear friend and the source of our strength and inspiration means that we could not continue as we were." Led Zeppelin was over. They had been together for just 12 years. In that time, they had released 9 studio albums, sold over 300 million records, and permanently changed the sound of rock music. Robert Plant has said in interviews that the decision to end the band immediately after Bonham's death was the easiest decision they ever made. There was simply no Led Zeppelin without John Bonham. That was never even a question. In 2007, Led Zeppelin performed together for the first time in 27 years at the tribute to Ahmet Ertegun concert at the O2 Arena in London. John Bonham's son, Jason, played drums in his father's place. The demand for tickets was unlike anything the music industry had ever seen. Over 1 million people applied for 20,000 available tickets. The ballot system crashed multiple times under the weight of requests. Touts were offering tickets for over £90,000 each. When the band took the stage that night, the entire audience was in tears before a single note was played. Plant, Page, and Jones were all in their 60s, and yet for 2 hours they played with the fire and power of 4 young men who had just discovered something extraordinary in a rehearsal room in London nearly 40 years earlier. Every music critic in attendance called it one of the greatest concerts they had ever witnessed. The offers that followed were staggering. Concert promoters offered Led Zeppelin $500 million for a world reunion tour. Robert Plant turned it down. He has never fully explained why. The 2007 O2 concert remains the last time Led Zeppelin ever played together. Led Zeppelin's legacy is not measured in awards or chart positions. It is measured in influence. Every hard rock and heavy metal band that came after them, from Aerosmith to Guns N' Roses to the Black Keys to Jack White, has named Led Zeppelin as their primary inspiration. Jimmy Page's guitar work redefined what was possible on a 6-string instrument. John Bonham's drumming set a standard that has never been matched. Robert Plant's voice remains the benchmark against which every rock vocalist is judged. And John Paul Jones, the quiet backbone of the band, played bass, keyboards, and orchestral arrangements with a versatility that held everything together. Together, they created a body of work that sounds as vital and alive today as it did in 1969. Because the greatest music never gets old. It just waits for new ears to discover it. So there you have it, the real story of Led Zeppelin. From a 36-hour debut recording session to the most in-demand reunion concert in history. The question is, which of these facts hit you hardest? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. If you are new here, welcome to SoundLegends. Every Thursday, we go behind the music of the greatest bands of the 80s and 90s. Last week, we covered Queen. If you missed it, go watch it right now. And next week, we are diving into Nirvana, the story of how Kurt Cobain almost walked away from music forever before recording the album that changed everything. Subscribe to SoundLegends so you do not miss it. See you Thursday.